I can't come in and learn anything about you if you don't share anything with me. It's really for me to take very particular notice of the words you're using to tell your own story, and for me to just sometimes question those a little bit, or just try to understand them, try to understand where and why this is your framing, or this is how you see yourself in the world.
Hello and welcome to Outlines, a podcast about sport, stories and the media. My name's Owen Connolly, hope you're well. It is great to have you listening. Something a bit different this time, but all the more interesting and valuable for it, I think. Jenny Simmons is a former communications director for Nike. She was responsible most recently for men's football and the Jordan brand in the EMEA region. And alongside that, as a passion project, she founded MANON, a creative storytelling outlet for women's football, which explored the game through photography and print magazines. Then about a year ago, she did something really quite unexpected. She left Nike, and she also shifted MANON from an editorial platform to one offering mindset coaching to black and brown women working in football. It's an unusual path, but one with storytelling in sport as a through line, and it's storytelling really that draws together the different parts of the episode ahead. Jenny explains why she moved into mindset coaching and why she chose to focus her attention where she has. But on top of that, she explores the role that stories play in professional identities, especially when those get defined externally by the companies you work for and the settings you work in. Then she reflects on her time at Nike. So we're going from a very intimate way of thinking about stories to a commercial brand level. But again, the brand involved is one whose roots lie in personal agency and the stories and motivations of individual athletes. Loads to unpack through a rich and varied set of themes, some thoughtful stuff. I really enjoyed it. That's all to come. Just quickly, we were off last week, as you'll know if you're a regular listener, and probably won't have noticed if you're not. Busy run of events and conferences recently, and a few people came up and had some really nice things to say about the podcast, which was very gratifying indeed. Of course, it'd be great if you could also say nice things to other people about the podcast and get them listening too. Rate and review the show as well. Get involved on socials. It all helps keep that audience building, and it's all much appreciated. But yeah, good to know that people are getting something out of these. Hopefully you'll like this one as well. Here is Jenny Simmons. What's Amsterdam like? Do people have, their ideas of it, but as a sports city and a sports marketing kind of hub, which has become in like the last, I'd say 10, 15 years particularly, like what's it like? How would you describe it?
Yeah, it is a really active city, actually. As you asked that question, it makes me think you can't sort of cycle down the street without seeing somebody with a hockey stick, sort of also. And it also looks quite like it's almost a bit apocalyptic when you see just loads of people cycling with hockey sticks, or like, everybody's in motion and people are going, people are running, people are, really, I think very active as a city. And I think then when you couple that with the fact that, there are the likes of like Under Armour's here, Nike's very close by, New Balance is also here, there's an Adidas office. I feel like there's a kind of like a sporting spine to the city, as it were. So I think that's what's really nice about it. And like football very much at the core, but as I say, like hockey is also big, basketball less so, but I've also seen over the past couple of weekends a couple of like skate competitions, which was also just really nice to see. You sort of start to see other sports kind of like mix into the culture as well.
Yeah, and then do you get that? I mean, most of Europe is like this, right? Where, or most of Northern Europe, I should say, when it becomes a very, very different place in the winter time. Like, what does that reflect as well? Are you starting to see, the gilets going on in the morning, or like people running with the headbands or whatever in that kind of active space?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there is quite a clear shift, and we're coming into that space now. And I think there's a really nice Dutch word, which I might butcher the pronunciation of, but it's gezellig. Which kind of means like cozy, like just like a cozy vibe. And I think like actually Amsterdamers really appreciate that as well. So I think there's this lovely, it's not like this like pure longing for these summer days. It's actually like there's a cuteness and a coziness to these darker moments. So people are still very active. People are on their bikes kind of all year round. People are running all year round, as you say. So it is quite like it's a bit of a 365 kind of city, I think, in that sense.
Yeah. How long have you been there now?
9 years.
Right.
9 jaar. If I'll use my only Dutch that I have, like there you go, there you go.
And like I mean, we'll talk more about kind of Nike a little bit later on because I'm keen to talk about Manon and the work that you're doing and kind of the way that you've moved into the places that you have with it. But like, how does the fact of Nike and these other companies being in Amsterdam, how does that change culturally what you're doing with kind of the stories that you're telling and the way that you're approaching sports culture in Europe? Because, you know, London is a big sports marketing city and Manchester as well. You have big brands there, particularly American headquartered ones and you know, creative agencies and stuff too that kind of manage some of that messaging and some of those channels and what have you, and are very influential. But do you feel like it's a more European thing being based in Amsterdam? Does that feed into the culture and kind of what your identity is when you're a big brand and you're based there?
Yeah, I think somewhat. And I think what I think of when you say about sports and all those sports companies that exist here, I think it's also really big for streetwear brands. It's almost got this like kind of oversized influence in streetwear culture as well in Amsterdam that I think then plays into a little bit sport and the kind of the collaborations that could exist, you know, among that as well. So if you think about, you know, a Patta who have, you know, also like a running crew, or then I think Daily Paper produced, you know, they made the one of the Ajax kits last year, for example. So there's this like wonderful crossover that exists when you have a city that is a capital, but it's also small enough to cycle from one side to the other in half an hour, 40 minutes. So actually what you get is almost like this kind of like a real pot of things that are just happening and always cooking, but
Yeah,
then it always feels quite accessible to you. It's almost like if there's something happening in east, you can, and you live west, you can go there, you can really sort of be involved. You can go to the Belma Arena, you can really just be part of it, I think, kind of always if you want to be. And I think that's what's kind of wonderful about it. And yeah, it does feel like very European. It is such a hub, and I think even just like quite a transient city. A lot of people come in, live for a couple of years, leave, come back for certain moments, or are just in town for for meetings or for projects and things like that. So it does feel like there's always kind of this like endless idea of opportunity around being here.
yeah. It's interesting that you know setting can still be so important for storytelling, even at the kind of scale of brands. And we,
Yeah.
you know, as I say, we'll come back to that kind of brand storytelling aspect. But what's really interesting with you is you've worked on that plane, and now you've kind of narrowed it all the way down to being a mindset coach. Let's set the terms a little bit of what that means, because it's something that people will be familiar with, but it
Yeah.
exists sort of in a space between like, you know, mentorship and therapy and various different things that people will, you know, have encountered in some way or form. But what is mindset coaching specifically?
Yeah, no, you've touched on it right in terms of the parameters within which it exists is quite unique, and I would sort of describe it as kind of like it's a structured practice where a client would work with a coach to kind of learn ways to change their thinking, challenge some of their beliefs that they have about either the world around them or themselves as well. You kind of can build new cognitive skills, within those conversations, and just I think the aim really is to try to create better outcomes for the individual that you're working with, whether that's in a personal endeavor or a professional one, sort of either or. So yeah, I find myself in this space now, and it feels like for me, like this is quite a natural evolution into this space. But I can see that from the outside looking in, it's almost like it feels like almost like a strange shift or a jump. But for me, almost like it feels like a natural progression from going from sort of telling stories to listening to them and then reflecting them back to the individual who's sharing them versus broadcasting them, outward and more broadly.
Let's take a step back and just, you know, as condensed as possible. I mean, I will have done this in the preamble, but like the journey that you took from working in football and working in communications with Nike through having this kind of parallel project in Manon, and that becoming something really different from what you intended it to be.
Yeah. So, as you say, I was working at Manon. At Manon, wow, always working at Manon. See, I was working at Nike in communications, but started Manon actually in 2013. as kind of a side project. It started off as a football photography website, and this was really a way for me to sort of like capture and share stories around the game that I just found compelling or interesting, either visually or sort of also with a little bit of written word as well. And I think that my intention with Manon in the first instance was actually to kind of just create cool content around football, and with the hopes of like actually attracting the attention of a brand like Nike. And actually quite soon after I started to do Manon as a website, I actually got a job at Nike. So I kind of just sort of kicked back, smoked my cigar, and was like, oh, that's fantastic. Like, I've made it. This is great. And it was actually only then a couple of years later, it was 2015, that I evolved Manon itself into a more of a sort of a storytelling platform in more of a pure sense. And I turned it into a football magazine, a print football magazine, specifically focused on the women's game. So I did the first issue, and the first issue was supposed to be the only issue, just so you're aware. So it was a one-off issue to cover the World Cup in Canada in 2015, just because I really felt that I was trying to create something that I wanted to see in the world and that I wasn't seeing. So I think I've found that a lot of the communication around sport for women and football in particular for women was, people would think about women in sport, women in football, and say, okay, well, let's make it pink, let's shrink it, let's make it handbag size, and she's going to love it. And I just thought, oh, I don't love that. And if I don't love that, I think other people maybe also won't love that. So how can I create something that I want to see in the world as a way to tell compelling stories around women in football, but it doesn't have to be so overtly designed in such a way that I think is supposed to appeal to women, essentially. So it was a one-off. I was like, that was great. That was a fun project. That's hard to do alongside my full-time job. I will close the chapter there. But then what happened was I moved then to the Netherlands, and then in 2017, the Euros, the Women's Euros, was going to be hosted in the country. And my friend said, "Oh, you should do another magazine. You should just do another one." I said, "Okay, yeah, like why not? I should do another one." So I sort of continued to do it almost like in this way. It almost became 2017. I did the Netherlands one. Then 2019, it was France for the World Cup, for the Women's World Cup, and the reality was like, the tournament that I fell in love with football was France 98. So then I thought, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if there's, a generation of young girls and boys who fall in love with football because of France 2019. So I've got to do that issue. And then, the next tournament was obviously going to be in England. I'm like, well, I'm from England, so of course I have to do an issue for this as well. So it almost kept on going like this. But I think one of the quite pivotal moments in Manon's journey was that I actually produced, a more one-off or off the tournament cycle issue in 2020. So it was obviously the year of the pandemic, or the beginning of the pandemic, essentially, and also the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. It had been just like a really tough year, I think, to exist for all of us in many ways and in many facets. And I kind of wanted to try and take some joy out of that year in whatever way I could. And the way that I saw doing that was actually creating an issue of Manon that was focused on Black and brown women in the game, essentially. So this was just a one-off. And I think in doing that, I kind of like connected in with a part of myself, and then also the storytelling platform just kind of like took a slightly different shape, I think, for me. So I really enjoyed that process. I stopped doing the magazine after the Women's Euros, but I kind of knew that still that Manon had the capacity to be something else in the future. It didn't have to be a website, it didn't have to be a magazine. There was always potential for it to be something more, or for it to evolve. And at that point, I didn't know what it was. But I think where I got to was I realized that actually the experience of Black and brown women in football, and then sort of shifting into mindset coaching, was the path that I wanted to take. And I'd kind of started to do that work already at Nike internally. I'd been doing some mindset coaching within the Jordan brand team, and really could find myself, lighting up at these conversations and lighting up in the ability to try to help people and guide them and help them to, get onto a path that made the most sense for them, and how we could help shape their story, essentially. So, the shift almost like it happened, I think, between 2020 and up until sort of now, I would say.
Yeah. What made you think, we're getting slightly ahead, because I do want to kind of talk
apologies.
A bit about no, not at all. The sort of the foundational thinking behind, the link between stories and coaching and stuff that you kind of hinted at just at the top there. But, you went to this point now where you offer coaching on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah.
And the natural move, or the logical move, may have been to do it at an enterprise level, or you had this thing that was a storytelling platform, a content platform, even though it was sort of bit of a labor of love and maybe something that, you know, became a thing that you could gather your community around at the same time as, you know, working for Nike? Because just to clarify, you were working on football, you weren't working on women's football when you were
Oh,
director of communications there.
I was working on football, and I think in some instances that would flex into my role at the end was men's and Jordan, and I was working more on the men's side. But it doesn't mean I didn't work on some women's football projects. But I wasn't.
No, but you were, But I think that's an important
women's
distinction to make, because I think people listening to it will think, oh, you were kind of combining comms work with Nike on women's football, but actually this was a you know, purely a kind of side project at this point. Exactly. But you know, you're gathering that community together. You know, there's a sense where maybe it makes sense, as I say, to do it at that kind of either storytelling platform level and redirect that energy into some of these conversations that you're having, or to highlight some of these themes that you're talking about with people kind of at a coaching level, or to kind of have it as a service that you sell into a big corporate because, you know, you've got that background. But instead you have done it on the one-to-one level, and you've specifically said, you know, I'm going to work with black and brown women in women's football. It's a very, and in the football industry, so it's kind of the broadest possible application of football, but it's still one sport,
super niche,
and kind of, you know, a particular community of people in that sport that you've decided to help. You know, how did you come to that decision? Why did you take that path?
Yeah, I think that's also like, again, it kind of goes back to the even the original ethos of MANON, this idea of creating something that you want to see in the world. And I think about maybe my experiences as a mixed black woman within the football space. And I think that the sort of maybe the tipping point or the turning point for me is when I started to do therapy, and you can kind of, come to that and say, okay, who do you want to be matched with? Who is it that you want to kind of work with? And I remember thinking, oh, I actually don't mind who I work with, but for me, they need to be black. They need to understand what it's like to walk the world as me, as somebody like that looks like me. Because actually, I think there's some things that I don't want to have to over-explain. I don't want to have to spend my time in my session sort of painting a picture. I think that person should just be able to understand me. And I think that also exists within the space of football, where you have, an incredibly sort of white male dominated space, but it doesn't mean that someone like me doesn't exist in that space. And how do we make sure that those people feel supported, listened to, and heard within a space that is maybe, has just not been designed with their wants and needs in mind, essentially. So I think that's where, for me, it became really clear that that's where I wanted to focus my energies, because I think there's a lot of work being done around creating more inclusive spaces as workplaces and all of this, in education and all of that sort of stuff. But actually, the people who are on a day-to-day just experiencing the industry as I would, or as somebody who looks like me would, what support do they have to be able to make sure that they can navigate this industry, which, we always say it's an intense industry, right? And it's like, how do I make sure that as many, women and women that look like me specifically are able to not just survive, but thrive in that space as well. So that's really my mission, is to make sure that there is a service that's provided so that people can feel like that's possible for them.
Yeah. And I suppose it takes us back to something we touched on a few minutes ago, which is the role of the personal story in that coaching process. Yeah. You know, the experience you're bringing to it, but also people being able to sort of, I don't want to say narrativize their way out of a particular challenge that they're having, but use that as a context to think about, well, who am I and how do I exist in this industry, and where will that take me?
Yeah. 100%. And I would say also, like, when I'm working with clients, it's really as much as they can get out of that, as much as they're able to give to me, and that they want to give to me. And I think that's my job, to create, a good rapport and a safe space for them to feel comfortable that they can share whatever it is that they need to share or want to share. And I think the big sort of part of my role really is asking the right questions. And sometimes those are questions that feel very uncomfortable to be asked. And sometimes those are questions that you would never have thought to ask yourself, or it's a belief that you hold and you just say, oh yeah, I always do this because of this. And I say, oh, since when? And then they can trace back to, like, oh, it's actually because of this. And it's like, oh, was that your choice? And it wasn't their choice. Or like, so you just start to, start to pick at or ask questions around even certain words that they use. It's that certain things that you would sort of start to pick up on, just to see how much of their story is the true story, or the narrative that they've built around, based on, the instances or the circumstances that they've been in their lives, whether that's personal or professional. But it is really about how much they can give to me, because I go into every conversation. I don't know the person to start with. I'm getting to know them, but they're the only person that can tell me about themselves. I can't come in and learn anything about you if you don't share anything with me, about who you are, what you want, how you've kind of journeyed this world as well. So I think it's really for me to take very particular notice of the words you're using to tell your own story, and for me to just sometimes question those a little bit, or just try to understand them and try to understand, where and why this is your framing, or this is, how you see yourself in the world.
Yeah. What are you drawing on there? Like, how far has the background that you had, kind of framing stories for the media, let's say, which is kind of a big part of what communications is. How much have you drawn on that, and how much is that just the career path that led you to this particular decision, if you see what I mean? Did you kind of, once you decided you were going to do coaching, obviously you have to qualify and prepare yourself and design a business around that. Everything else is prelude. But how do you think about those influences, the professional influences you've had in the past?
Yeah, I think sometimes your journey only makes sense when you look backwards. I think so many people sort of say that you can connect the dots when you look backwards at them. And I think, the work maybe I was doing in communications, where you're sort of trying to draw out either a news hook or a pull quote that is the thing that makes that interview sort of stand out above and beyond, the rest of the athlete storytelling that you've been doing, or something like this. It's like, how do you get to the meat of that bone? And I think a lot of the work I actually did at Nike as well was a bit, I would somehow became kind of a bit of the internal interviewer as well. So when we'd have athletes come in, I would often be the one that was, tasked with interviewing them, which I always really enjoyed. And I think I always really enjoyed also crafting those questions that would try to draw something out of the athlete, try to, again, make them feel safe, comfortable, willing to share something that maybe they've not said before, or something that just feels like the most natural thing to say in response to the thing that I've asked. So I think this is, it's maybe always been a little bit in my DNA, which I think is quite funny, because I think in my personal life, I am like the least nosy person. But then I think almost that you kind of have to be this very nosy person in a professional sense. So I find it quite funny. It's almost like this duality of how I exist. And it's almost like I'm asking all these probing questions in my work life, and in my personal life, I'm just like, you know what, if they feel like saying it to me, they'll say it to me. Like, I'm not going to ask. And I just find that quite a funny way to exist. But again, this is something I'm only recognizing in myself now, retrospectively, as you sort of piece back your own personal journey.
Yeah. There's also something that kind of came out of a moment, as you say, 2020, 2021, there was a lot of introspection about corporate culture, some of it around specific issues, whether that was race or gender, some of it around just contact time, because people were getting less kind of incidental contact with people that they worked with. How do you reflect on the communication structures that exist within an organization on the scale of Nike? Like, for me, I've covered companies like Nike for an awful lot of my career. I've never worked in one on that scale. So I'm kind of asking this kind of out of personal curiosity, but it is also something that, there was a moment in time where people got very, very earnest about what could be achieved within these organizations. And now, as we'll kind of come to, the conversation, the tenor of it shifted slightly in the last couple of years, not necessarily for the better. But what are your reflections on the environment that this arose from?
Yeah, I think I would always say, in this instance, I would always say, for example, my experiences at Nike, and I would say Nike is the best of a bad bunch. Like, it's at the end of the day, it's still a corporate, it's still trying to, make money, it's a business, all of those things, and I completely understand. And I think there were actually many very positive things in place at organizations like that, such as networks and lots of different ways to engage with your employee base in order to make sure that they feel supported, seen, heard. Internal storytelling, I think, was a really big part of making sure that people could understand their peers, their colleagues, and that access to that was really vast. What I would say is that those corporate structures also, the demands on your time are so high that all of these things can be sort of laid out for you to say, this is great, you can learn about this, you can be curious about this, you can do all of this stuff, and we're offering that. It's for the individual to take their time and say, I'm my own boss in this moment, and I will use my time to go and learn about XYZ community, or I'll use my time to go and have that conversation with that person, or I can just go to those meetings that I guess I have to go to and all of that sort of stuff. So I do think there is so much onus on the individual. So there's only so much these brands and corporates can do, in that it's the individual's decision and choice about how they use their time as well. And I think it's easy to think you're not your own boss at a big place like that, but I'm like, I was my own boss. You're your own boss. Like everybody really is. It's your, your time is your voting power of like how you see yourself or how you see your priorities as well. So I think like my experience was there was so much you could kind of go and learn and sort of as whether it's personal development or understanding about other people and other cultures, but it's whether you take that step for yourself, and that's the big challenge.
Yeah, and I suppose the other side of it, if you're working for, I mean, in any kind of professional capacity, but in a corporate setting, you're plowing your furrow. It's part of a bigger project, but I particularly think of coaching as being something that's very centered around identity and purpose and the incentives that you respond to as a person. If you're working in a corporate setting, the incentives get re-engineered or reoriented, and the thing that carried you into, I don't want to use Nike as the only example, but that carry you into a big corporate setting where you're really good at what you do and you're really motivated by creativity in sport, let's say.
Yeah.
Suddenly it becomes about delivering on a particular set of KPIs, and some people get very well motivated by that, and some people get gradually alienated by that. But it's just it's a really interesting kind of divergence, I suppose, in how people think about their work, particularly people who get wrapped up in what their work is to them, rather than being able 100%. To leave it at the door.
Yeah, 100%. Like I say, I think people have more power than they like to believe sometimes, like even in big structures like this. And I think that's where I also want for people to understand, like in the work that I do, that they also have their own agency in many instances to be able to act on things that make sense to them, and that can always align to a corporate structure or things like that. But it's almost like, how do you make sure that you're at the end of the day doing something that also fills you up, because actually you'll go and then do a better job for that organization, or go and do something that sort of makes sense for everyone if you're feeling like it's coming from a place that's very true to you, versus it feeling like it was imposed on you essentially.
Yeah. What was the point at which you decided that you didn't want to be in that environment anymore and you wanted to kind of strike out and do this thing on your own?
I just, like, as I say, like almost like the momentum sort of continued to build for me, and I could just sort of really feel like it was like, it really felt, I think a lot of people said, oh, it's so brave what you're doing. And I said, it's almost like it was my only option. It was almost like it became like this calling of like, I have to go and do this. I have to go and create this thing that I think should exist in the world. And not to say I'm the only person doing it, but I want more competition. I want more people going out and doing the work that I am also doing, because I think it's such important work as well. So I think it was like a gradual build, but I also sort of look back at myself. I was at the brand for 11 years, and like that was like absolutely my dream job when I landed that job, in my sort of late 20s kind of thing, mid to late 20s, landed that job. I was like, that's it, that's amazing. But actually towards the end, I'd done so many things, and I really enjoyed the project I worked on. And I always say you can't complete Nike, but I worked on sports, where I worked on football, I worked on running, I worked on women's, I Jordan basketball. I did so much, and I was ready for a next step. And I also really strongly believe in creating space for somebody else, because there'll be somebody else who would want the job that I was doing so badly. And I was enjoying it, and I could do it. And, of course, I could kind of carry on doing it and enjoy going to Euros finals. I could keep going to K54 basketball tournament. I could keep doing all of those things. But actually, I think it was also really important for me to create space for somebody else who had the same hunger that I had when I first entered the organization, so that they can keep that burning desire that exists. Because now my burning desire exists for Manon and the work that I want to do there. So I think it's almost like, out of respect to the brand and business, that I also step away. And I think that there should be more people that also think like this, because I think it's really important that fresh ideas, new energy, and hunger continues to exist in like all organizations across the board, because that's what produces the best work. That's what makes these environments like incredible to work in, and that's what makes you look back so fondly and think and tell like great stories about your time there, is because you were existing with people who had that same level of hunger and feeling and desire that you did.
Yeah. We'll come back to kind of Nike in the slightly more conceptual sense in a few minutes. I do want to talk about the other aspects of the mission that Manon has as like the people that you're coaching. You know, you have taken this decision, as you say, it comes from partly a sense that your personal experience can kind of shape the guidance that you're able to give. But what do you think, kind of more holistically, what do you think the experience of Black and brown women in football is like? What do you think goes unseen maybe in those stories?
Yeah, I think it's like becoming less and less unseen, which is, I think, like
Sure.
I don't know whether this is good or bad, essentially. But I think, yeah, I think when you are a Black or brown woman working in space of football, I think you are often the only one or one of few in those spaces. And I think, as I said, like we're existing in the world in a very different way. Our framing is very different. Our experiences are very different. And then just sort of looking around and not having people maybe that understand where you're coming from, it also becomes just like a really hard existence. Or if there's something that needs to be spoken up about, and it's about women, or it's about, ethnic minority, if that's how you want to refer to the grouping, or global majority, that also just shouldn't just land on me just because I'm the
Hmm.
person, right? Like, and it's that, and the weight that exists when you are that person is a lot. It's really a lot to carry. And I think when I speak about football, it's like, I mean, there's a reason I'm still here in it, like, decades on, that I'm still existing, because I think it is such an incredible sport. It's fun. It's full of, passion, creativity, like excitement, entertainment. It is like, it's an amazing game, and it's an amazing, way to engage with other people. But it's also at the same time, it's full of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, misogynoir, like all of those things completely coexist. And it doesn't mean that someone that looks like me shouldn't be able to show up and exist in this industry, but it makes it really hard, because every day, and I can use today and yesterday as an example, it's like, one of the Spurs women's players has come out that she's also been racially abused in the same way that Jess Carter was during the Euros. And it's almost like that those kind of instances where it's like I can pick up my phone and it's almost it's a finger back to me to say you're not welcome here. And even if you succeed at the highest level, even if you win a Euros, Jess, people have still got things to say about you, and people will say horrible things to you. So it's just not an easy way to exist. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be here. And that's my thing. It's like we cannot be defeated by this fact
Sure.
of the fact that it doesn't feel like the most safe and inclusive space for us. But like, how do we make it so? And I think my goal is really to sort of work with the individuals who are existing in this way, to build their confidence, their resilience, to make sure that they can show up in the best way possible for themselves and protect themselves, and for the others that they're working with as well. My mission is not to sort of go to everyone who doesn't agree with the fact that I should be able to exist in that space and try to educate them about the fact that I should be allowed to be in that space. Like my work is really not in the education space. It's really more in the preparation
Yeah.
for the women that exist in this industry.
Yeah, because I suppose a thing that can happen when, if you're a woman or a person of color, or you're gay or whatever it might be, and you're not, as you say, you might be the only person in that setting. You've kind of spent a lot of your career almost being the spokesperson for that minority when something happens.
Yeah.
And I suppose the process that you're leading people through is reconnecting with their personal professional identity and their personal professional mission, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't just be, well, Jenny said it was fine, so I think it should be fine. Like, it's like, this is not good enough. And like, that is like, that is the experience of many people across, clubs, federations, brands, boardrooms. That is for sure the experience of many people, where it's like, yeah, well, we checked it with that person and they said it was good, so hopefully the community says it's fine. It's like, that's not what this is about. Like, that can't be the way that this goes.
But it's also like, you didn't get into this job to be,
exactly.
the black or brown person in the room. You got into the job to do the work, and like, you kind of got to reconnect to the work.
And I think that is it. It's almost like, there are so many things that exist before you even get into the room and have to you just want to do a good job. Like, that is it. You just want to go enjoy and do a good job. But like the layers that exist, I think, beneath that, often the unseen things, or the things that are misunderstood, or just not really recognized, that actually means that, like, to do a good job is actually an amazing job. I think in many instances for people who are just having to navigate an industry, as I say, that was not built with their sort of needs, wants, or existence in mind, essentially.
I mean, again, that period around the pandemic, there were a lot of well-meaning conversations about inclusivity, and there's a feeling, and some of this is guided by changes in the political environment, that's gone back to being, for some people, I don't know whether you call it a luxury or a distraction or whatever their perspective is on it, but less of a priority. It's been deprioritized in some environments. Like, what's your feeling on how the conversation around inclusion has changed in sport in the last 2-3 years?
Yeah, I think we got to a space that was like, it was actually a very interesting tension point where it was almost like this idea of like, we need to have uncomfortable conversations. And I think people were like starting to find some comfort in having uncomfortable conversations, which I think was a really good space to be in, because it meant that there were mistakes made, there was open dialogue, there was very frank conversations about, I understand your intent, this was the impact, and next time, this is what we can do, or this is what I would suggest, whatever it would be. And I think this was it was a really uncomfortable time for many people, but I think you have to keep pushing to actually get the progress there. But it's almost like, I think we started to see the friction, see the tension, and then as you say, that political climates sort of existed, and I think it's a little bit then hands off the wheel to say, oh well, I guess now that doesn't make sense. So it's almost like it's a reinvigoration of some of those uncomfortable conversations. It's really sort of pushing again, sort of knowing that it was, that we were nudged further forward. We've maybe been pushed back, but we now need to push back, further and harder to ensure that actually the progress is being made. And I do believe that actually, a lot of places, I'm also very hopeful. You have to be very hopeful as well, I think, in all of this sort of stuff. But I'm very hopeful that a lot of people are still continuing this work, but like maybe not being so overt and actively communicating that outwardly because of the ways and means that might impact them on a different level. So I'd like to think that there's still people sort of feeling that that's a value, and that there's work still to be done. But it's not helpful when the powers that be often are completely discrediting some of this work that does need to be done. So you kind of see a bit of a pendulum swing, and I feel like we're back on the other end of the pendulum. But I really believe that the swing will come back, and I think that's kind of like, that's human nature, that's history a little bit, that we continue to see that. So I'm remaining hopeful, is what I would say. I mean,
yeah, and I think for most people, as you say, there's a lot of stuff that is settled as far as most people are concerned, and or at least the opinion is settled on it, on whether inclusion is a good thing, or whether it's a good thing to have a diverse workplace or a better representation in sport, what have you. But of course, the argument still happens because it's in some people's interest for that argument to happen. But like, are there things that you think could be approached differently? Or I'm talking about more on a kind of structural communication level here. Again, in that period, you were in a big company, and you were inwardly, there was a lot of this discussion happening, and also there was a lot happening outwardly. Or is it, are we trying to be wise after the fact if we start to approach some of these conversations in that way? Because you can't put yourself back in that moment and apply the sentiments that maybe surround certain topics now to what was happening in that moment. You kind of have to think forward.
I think that is really the way. It's about thinking forward. And it's hard for me to even like actually retrospectively place myself in that moment in time, because now I'm really focused on my own goal, my own vision. So I think all of those experiences have compounded. I process them in some way, shape or form, but now I'm just using a lot of that as fuel to sort of push myself forward, to be able to think about the work that I want to do, and progress the industry in a way that I essentially just know that I just want to leave the industry better than I found it. And I know that this is not a solve for life or anything like this. It's more like it's a solution that I think is like really important to be offered, so that, as I say, people that are existing in this space can really feel seen and heard, because I think that's the thing that feels really difficult when you don't have people that feel like they're truly supporting or truly understanding the message that it is that you're trying to convey, essentially. So I think this is where I feel really strongly about how I just move forward and create that. And I think it's almost like the difficulty, but then also the privilege of then now going off and doing your own business is like all decisions land on me, and that good or bad, like that's on me now. Like however I sort of create that moving forward, you hope to do the best. And I think that's also a good learning for me is like, you can understand when the best intentions are the best intentions, but how that actually lands and how you move forward with that is also not always in completely your control. And you just have to, again, react and navigate based on sort of what happens as a result of that. And I think that's, again, like the, neuroplasticity and this idea of like being sort of malleable and able to sort of shift gears and find yourself in a space that, makes sense. There's a setback, but how do you come back from that setback, So I think that is really where I'm focused. And I think that, then thinking of the experiences that I had, it's almost like I just know it was fuel for my tank, essentially.
Yeah. Let's just look at the MANON project and its kind of roots again, kind of more generally. Like, is there still an editorial dimension that you see for that in its future, or have you kind of left, or a community dimension, or have you left that bit behind and you're kind of focusing on this for now?
I feel like, honestly, anyone can say anything to me. I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll do that. Like I'm almost like, I need to be laser focused. It's so funny. Some people say, oh, let's do a football tournament. Like, yeah, let's do that. So suddenly I'm going into an event space or something like this. But I actually did something this summer, which I really enjoyed because, as I said, like, it was, of course, in more of this editorial space in its infancy. But I created a small zine for the Women's Euros. So I just sort of featured some of the Black and brown women who were representing their countries. And I did a small meet up in Basel because I was going to one of the games. And so again, this was almost like a way to, for me, have a creative output, with a sort of loose link to my mission, but then also an opportunity to meet people who are also in Basel and were also going to the game. So it's almost like, and this is what I actually really like about the flexibility of this idea that like now I'm just making decisions that make sense for me or what I think could be cool or what I think could be fun. Like, how do I sort of express myself either visually or in another way that makes sense to me? So I think I feel like this element will probably never die because somehow it's just in my soul that I just love to try to create and try to push things forward as well. And I don't know if you know The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Do you know this book?
It's someone's mentioned that to me. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and because I'm also doing that right now, and I think like one of the exercises, one of the tasks was talking about future visions, and I kind of like getting prompted, getting asked a question that I think I wouldn't have asked myself. I almost like devised this like idea and vision for MANON in the future that meant I was also it was almost like it was a studio where it was a coaching practice, but also I was creating work, like whether that would be like artwork or it'd be like documentaries, short films. Like it was almost like I had this vision for myself because I was asked this question through this that I would never have put in my 10-year plan for MANON from a business perspective. But it was really interesting to me that actually that sort of stuff, like it's obviously within my soul. Like there is just in this need to create, and whether it's a small zine or if it's a film or something like this, it's almost like I think that exists in me. But for sure, with coaching at the heart of it, it's almost like what opportunities lie just do feel a bit endless. But I'll try to stay focused as
well. Let's move on because I think we're running a little bit light on time now, and kind of look at kind of the Nike story in the round, go way out again, and we're almost doing this in reverse because we've started with the small story and we're building out again to the big story. But like, what was your understanding of how Nike think about storytelling? And obviously it was important for you to understand it, right? Because you're trying to communicate to other people. But what was your how does Nike approach sports storytelling?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I sort of learned when I first got there, because I was working before in PR, but for often like much smaller brands, and it was really important for people to like know the name of your brand and recognize your logo essentially. And it's almost like when I got to Nike, it's like that is like there'll be so few people in the world that don't know or understand what the swoosh is. So your job is not to get a name check in a magazine, a paper, online. That is not what you need to do because that job has already been done. So it's almost like what's the message? What do we stand for as a brand? And I thought this was also a good shift and good test for me. And I think this idea, I think there's a few like essentially sort of principles or values, mantras that exist at Nike that I think really come back to the core of what it is. It's like this idea that if you have a body, you're an athlete. So we're all athletes. Listen to the voice of the athlete. So again, athlete first, get into the mindset of the athlete, and you won't go too far wrong, because if you're a sports company and you're thinking purely from the mindset of the athlete, like this is the purest form of expression that you can really have. And then I think, the other one that really sort of struck me as well is this idea of like the mission of sort of bringing innovation and inspiration to every athlete in the world. So this sort of duality of innovation and inspiration, I think, was a really interesting way to sort of have as your focal point for your storytelling. So it could either play into pure innovation, it could play into pure inspiration, or it could be a combination of both. And I think often the most powerful was a little bit the combination of both. So I think this was a really nice framing for me to understand that actually it's really about like what's the deeper layer, that what do we really want people to think of when they think of Nike, not just, oh, that's the swoosh and I get it, I guess they make good product. It's like, but what does their product do? Like, how can this help you as an athlete? So this was really I think the framework that you would always approach your storytelling with.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting again because it kind of brings it round to that idea of individual agency and taking control, and just do it is like literally the Nike logo. How do you approach that when you're trying to knit together stories that are about communities, or you're trying to do that at scale? Is it just that it's by this point so embedded, it's such an understood thing, it's been so heavily inculcated through decades of advertising and endorsements and athlete stories and what have you, or are you still kind of thinking on a theoretical level about this stuff when you're putting campaigns together and so on?
Yeah, and often there would be like a sort of like almost like a subline, something that would like actually, it's almost like sitting below just do it, that would actually be more helpful to sort of bring a story together, or make it a little bit more sharp. And so it would have the principle or the spirit of just do it, but it might be like, I'm trying to think, it's like, risk everything or something like this, so it's almost like risk everything, therefore just do it, like it's like a dream crazy, therefore just do it, like do the thing that you're dreaming of, essentially. So I think those kind of like sublines were really helpful in sort of making sure that the narrative like built up to something that was like tangible for an individual based on whatever sport it was that you were talking about, or a particular athlete that you were speaking of, and then it sort of like lathered up essentially to a just do it message. So I think that was always really helpful, that by season or by year there was often this like subline that was like really able to sort of carry the story as well.
Yeah. Then the thing that you mentioned earlier on, which is that you'd been involved with Nike for several years, and then on the football side, they bring Jordan brand into Europe. They have the partnership with PSG, but it just becomes like a part of that ecosystem in a way that, I mean, it hadn't been at all, had it? I'm not misremembering that. There had been no like Jordan brand football lines or anything like that. It was a basketball brand, and someone said this would be a cool use of PSG. It would be to. So how do you manage that integration and that overlapping of two what had been quite distinct brands, right? Even though Michael Jordan, obviously, people would associate with Nike quite strongly.
No, and it was I think that's a really exciting project to work on. I think that was like probably one of the moments in time we were, oh, this is a very interesting sort of merging of two worlds. And I think in football often you can see things getting kind of rehashed a little bit, or like, this feels tired or this feels old. But I think at the time that announcement was made, it was really like, okay, like how does this come about? And I think that PSG specifically was like just the absolute right club for that to be launched with, because I think it's made so much sense with like MJ's connection to Paris. There's the K54, which is like the biggest street ball tournament in the world, happens there every summer. City. Like all of these things. It's like it's linked to sort of fashion, and I think MJ was maybe not like considered so fashionable at the time. Like I think people used to like kind of like be a bit mean about his outfits, but now retrospectively, of course, we all think he looked amazing. So it's also quite funny, this idea of like this fashion focus as well with Paris, and so it just really felt like the right club to do that with. And so I think the integration actually felt like very natural in quite a strange way. And I think when it came to Jordan Brand, like outside of football, there was a lot of there's a lot of stuff that now with golf, there was a bit of like a training collection. There was sort of many things that had existed before, but I think with football, it needed to be the right moment, the right club, and PSG really felt like that. I think that connection sort of really felt sort of very genuine, and it was exciting, I think, at the time that launched as well. So I think then the challenge becomes like, how do you sort of renew excitement in something that's now been announced however many years ago? And it's like, we get it, there's a Jumpman on the PSG kit, like we get it, so it's almost like that's the next stage of that partnership. It's like, how do you keep that interesting for the consumer when actually like the big moment was the reveal moment of that?
So you're going deeper and you're trying to find the stories about, I guess, the things that made sense. And when people were sitting around a table in a room, you've got to go out and find those stories and highlight those stories about the crossover between football and basketball culture, or in Paris or what have you. I suppose that's the other thing when you're at a brand like Nike, is you're dealing a lot with kind of iconography, and when you're working in the function you were, like, how do you balance the brand's going to do some work for me here with, I actually need to do a bit of legwork and kind of create campaigns or lead people to talk about the brand in this way?
Yeah, I think what was like actually for me the most exciting thing about working with comms is because you were working with external partners. So it was almost it was a bit of a dance and a negotiation with, like, this is a Jordan brand story, this is a Nike story, but how do we make that relevant to your audience, but still it retains the essence of like what Nike represents or what Jordan represents. And I think that's where you can be a little bit more playful, a little bit more fun, versus it being like, we've done this, take a look at this, publish this. Like, it's almost like that's kind of that's not the exciting space. Like, and if the work is like incredible and you see that stuff, like sometimes that work just flies and it goes out the door and everybody sees it and everybody enjoys. But for me, the joy was in actually, how do you marry our brand at that time, with a specific partner who has got their own, storytelling style. They've got their own audience that they know and they understand better than we understand their audience. We understand our consumer, but how do they specifically sort of relate that story to their consumer that's potentially the same as our consumer, but they need to digest it in a way that makes sense for them on their platform as well. So I think that that dance for me was always the nicest part of it, because that's where you get, I think, to slightly more creative territory, and it's not just a plug and play of like, yeah, we've done this, so like, what do you think? It's more like, how do we in partnership create something that's going to be impactful for us and also for you?
Yeah. And are there any times, or were there many times where you'd see something out in the wild and you go, oh no, we've not got that? And how, again, does it become easier when it's a brand where the sort of language of it is so well understood that as soon as you see something and it's like, we've not got that set up right, we've not got, people have, that feels like it doesn't fit, or it's inauthentic, or what have you?
Yeah. I think so, like, I think often, and I think this is also what was a really good part about working at Nike, like, people really sweat all of the details. Like, it's almost like that, the scrutiny that a lot of the work goes, under and through, it means that, like, often when it goes out to the world, it's like everybody's like, okay, pretty much everyone's okay. And of course, not everybody's going to love everything. That's of course, like, never going to be the case. But I think, like, there's probably like few instances where something goes out that it's just like, oh, it just like slightly didn't hit, and because of those layers. Whereas I for sure have seen like other brands put things out and I see them go out and I think, oh my gosh, this would never have got anywhere, like a Nike, for example, because I do think the layers and the scrutiny was so tight that often it meant that, that was a very, very good filter for whether that does or doesn't resonate or connect.
Yeah. And how does that happen when the brand itself is going, through that process of change? I mean, the Jordan brand move is recent, but we think of it as really recent because we're maybe a bit older. It's actually not that recent now. But like, I can like still decades remember, ago to me. I can still remember when they weren't brand new to football, but they'd done a couple of bits and then suddenly they were everywhere. And it's, telling that story in an environment and a culture that's really quite, can get quite set in its expectations. How do you manage that feeling of, this is right, this is the right story to tell for this brand, when you're maybe not quite in the setting that you're comfortable with, and you're not quite in the groove that an organization like that can get into?
Yeah, I think that's why it's like really important to rely on like the local like insights and intel to make sure that storytelling or whatever that is feels really sharp and feels really genuine. And sometimes that's not the biggest story. That can be a very small story, but it feels authentic, and the right people will see it and connect with it, and that is actually the job done. So it's not about the eyeballs or this or that. It's like actually using the right protagonist, or it's something like this. So I think like where I was obviously working in the Geo in the EMEA team, so we would work with our city teams who would actually be the ones that were really sort of of making sure they had the fingers on the pulse to ensure that actually those stories were being connected to the right people, the right partners, to ensure that it just did feel of the city or of the club and such. So I think that reliance on that relationship and that trust that needs to be built. I think that was a really big part of it as well. To ensure that you weren't just like, rehashing the same people or the same partners, and there's a balance to strike there with that, right? You don't want to neglect your old storytellers or your old community partners or whoever it is that you were liking to tell stories through. It's almost like there's a way that you need to integrate new and fresh ideas as well as sort of retaining some of this as well. So I think there's again, that's another dance to do. That sometimes you hit, sometimes you miss, for sure.
Yeah. And then just to bring it back round to kind of the overarching theme, I guess, of this conversation, like how much influence, how much autonomy, how much did you feel as an individual you were able to steer something in a given direction? I mean, I say, like you were a drone, you were obviously the director of communications for EMEA in a category, but like how much do you feel as one person you're guiding the flow of that, I suppose? How much influence do you feel like you had?
Yeah, I think I was an all powerful being. I mean, that's what I can tell you. No, I actually really felt that a lot. Like I think, especially in a communications role where it's actually you're a protector of the brand as well as telling stories. We're making sure which stories don't make sense to tell as well, or that this doesn't feel right. This isn't appropriate now, or this needs to be told later because actually that's going to lather up something bigger further down the line. So actually, you're playing. I would say like you're playing quite a central midfielder role. Like that's maybe how I would see it, and especially in a geography and especially in a communication function like communications, where it's like you maybe have some broader vision that maybe some of the other teams that are trying to execute maybe don't have because you have some additional context or there's other things that are maybe in the pipeline that you're aware of. So I think you do actually have in roles like that quite a lot of control. And I used to just laugh at myself because sometimes I would like, maybe there was an idea to launch a kit on such a date and I would say, hey, this doesn't make sense because of X, Y, and Z. And they'd be like, okay, yeah, let's push it out then. And I would just laugh at myself and be like, oh my God, little Jenny Simmons from Lancaster has just said, at the time, Arsenal can't launch their kit on this date because of this. And they all just said, yeah, okay. And I almost laugh looking back at my 10-year-old self and just thinking, wow, like, did you ever think you'd be in that position of, and I say power, but also just that idea of like having that knowledge, having that sort of insight to be able to steer and guide people in the right way. So there were like definitely instances where I would just like sort of like almost have an out of body experience and just be like, that's funny, I just said don't do it, and so they didn't do it, so I think you do have power, and as I said earlier, actually I think individuals have a lot more power than they believe also in those organizations to do good things, to make changes, to find a way to have impact as well in whichever way kind of feels appropriate to them.
Okay, that is power, telling Nike don't do it.
Yeah, exactly, that's me.
Yeah. Okay. Right. 3 questions that we ask everybody before we wrap up. Do you have an origin story or something that sparked your interest in sport?
Yeah, football really is like my big passion, and like I grew up on a street in Lancaster, which was not quite a cul-de-sac, but it was kind of a street that if you were driving down there, it's kind of because you needed to. So therefore, it was fantastic territory to play football on.
It feels like that's the kind of setting where like there's a Lancashire word for it, like
Yeah,
a not quite cul-de-sac,
a ginnel or something like that, but it's not ginnel. Like it's something like that. There would be a word, but yeah, true. Like that, I need to work out what that is. But in doing that, I sort of lived on this street that all the kids would play football, and I think when I was younger, all the older kids would be playing on the street, and I was maybe too young to be out there. But I would look from my parents' bedroom window. I'd be staring down the street and just really longing to go out there and play. And then when I was old enough, I went and I would be always playing football on the street with these older kids. And for me, this was just such a big that was like really just sparked so much joy in me to go on and play football. And my parents were actually thinking of buying a different house on a main road in Lancaster. And I just think, oh my God, my life would have been, I think, so different had that been my reality. And so maybe I wouldn't have had that access because nobody in my family was really caring about football. It was really all coming from me. And I think that was, lovely to almost like have this thing that you had a bit of ownership over as well, or like you were the one that was really into that. So shout out to Lancaster and that not quite cul-de-sac.
Okay. What's your favorite piece of sports storytelling?
Okay, please indulge me because I do have 2. How do you feel about that?
That's fine. I mean, people have interpreted this any which way.
Okay. So my first one I would say is Zidane, a 21st century
Okay,
portrait,
yeah.
which I just think is like, yeah, so beautiful. And just like, it's really like majestic and yeah, quite hypnotic, I think, just to watch that for 90 minutes and just like, yeah, it's essentially a glorified player cam, right? But it's like, it's just to say that is like maybe a bit rude to the filmmakers. But I think just this like, it was kind of, I think it was like 17 cameras like rigged up or whatever. And it was just like, it's just this one shot, right? They've spent a lot of money rigging that up. And it's like, this kind of has to go the way it needs to go. And like, fingers crossed it's good. And it was like incredible. And it ends with Zidane getting sent off. And it's just like, it couldn't be more perfect. It felt scripted. And it was, yeah, just like beautifully poetic. So I think this, I can never not mention because I just think it's really great piece of storytelling.
Yeah. The foreboding in that. I think
Yeah.
it's, it's an interesting point that, yeah, it had to work for them because you have the concept. And I think this happens quite a lot in a space like sport, right? Where you can have the concept and you can have everything set up. And if,
Just doesn't go the way.
story, yeah.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And my second one, if you'll allow it,
Yeah, sure.
is actually quite like, I say niche, but like people tell me if this is niche or not. But when I was younger, I think it was early 2000s, maybe 2001, 2002. There was a T4 or Channel 4 a documentary series called The Players. And it was focused on Crystal Palace's youth academy. And it was almost like following their players to see who would get a contract at the end of the season. And this, I was so obsessed. I became like, I'm a Liverpool fan, but I became quite obsessed with Crystal Palace for quite this period of the early 2000s. I would go and watch them if they came to the Northwest. I like became obsessed with Wayne Routledge. Like it was just so compelling to me. And I really love it. I've actually, in having this conversation now, I was like, I need to see if I can find it. And it's quite hard to find on the internet, but it's available on YouTube somewhere, but it's not called The Players. But I think what I loved about that is that at the time, you just didn't have access to this sort of information of like who the next breed of players were. You didn't really see behind the doors of these clubs. Social media wasn't a thing. So it was just all like, you had no idea what was happening. So I think to open the doors to that just had such an impact on me because I just never seen anything like it. So I think it really stuck with me for all these years, but I just, really, really enjoyed and enjoyed following Wayne's career for some reason.
There you go. Stuart Rosen, who was one of the early guests on the podcast, he said that he feels like the time is right for a series about academy football and the things that people go through, and it would obviously exist in a completely different context now, and probably different access and different understanding of what stories you should and shouldn't tell. But that's become such an industrialized part of football that it would be a really interesting moment to
revisit
to watch
like,
that.
100%. 100%.
But what's a sports story that you'd like to tell or see somebody else tell?
Okay, again, this might be controversial, but I'm willing to share that I think that Bend It Like Beckham, as it's been announced that there's going to be a follow-up to Bend It Like Beckham, great news. I believe that this should become just kind of like the Fast and the Furious franchise, and I want to see Bend It Like Beckham 8. Like that's what I need to see in the world. So somebody make that, and I'll be really happy with it.
I mean, given the piling of ideas upon ideas and craziness and all that in the Fast and Furious franchise, I don't know what a Bend It Like Beckham. Don't they go to space at some point in Fast and Furious?
I love that I've not even seen all. I think I've definitely not even seen one of them. I just know I need 8 Bend It Like Beckhams.
You just know you need all the movies.
I just know there's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, how important was that as a piece of media for girls? Because I have nieces who, one of whom plays football, and cousins' kids who play football who are kind of coming into their teens now. And it's just not an unusual thing at all for girls to play football now. But around the time Bend It Like Beckham came out, that was quite a
wild,
radical story to tell, I guess. Like, and to do it in the kind of way that it was done. Like, how important was that, reflecting on it?
Yeah, I think like at the time it really felt like for me like, oh, you felt seen, I think, in a way that just felt really good, because again, like often you were the only girl playing on teams, or like all of this sort of stuff that existed, and again, it's one of those where you look back retrospectively and you realize the impact actually seeing something like that, what that had on you. And I think we spoke sort of before the call, like I went to the US on a scholarship, and I refer to that as my Bend It Like Beckham era. And so it's almost like, and whether that would have existed with or without that film? Probably it would. Like, I was taking my football seriously. That felt like a sort of serious place to go and play football. But at the same time, it's almost like to know that it's almost like possible really felt like, oh no, it is like these couple of English girls, they can do it, they've gone and done it. So I think for me it was really like very affirmative, to show that something like that was possible, and it was a story that could be told, like nationwide or worldwide as well. So I think it was super important. But again, it's only more in retrospect that I realized how impactful something like that was.
Yeah, just think what 8 more of them could do.
I know. And I would like to make sure that there's always, because Shaznay Lewis from All Saints was in it, so there should always be a pop star in it. There should always be some sort of like pop star. And obviously Keira Knightley was in it, so maybe she should also be in every single one of them. She's the red thread.
Sure.
That's just a couple of ideas that I'm throwing.
We'll see if you get the call, but
don't hold my breath.
Jenny, it's been fascinating. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Outlines is an original production from 2640.